I'm Bob McCarty. I'm the Executive Director of the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry. One of the things that's become really clear in this symposium on lay ecclesial ministry is that the territory in which we do ministry today is changing rapidly. One of the things that happened last night with Nancy Armerman's talk about the changing landscape of church and what's going on culturally and what's going on societally in terms of our faith communities is critical implications for how we do church, and especially in my field, how we do youth ministry. So what's going to happen for us as pastoral leaders, if we acknowledge a changing territory, is going to require that we are willing enough to change our ministerial maps. What's it going to look like today to do effective ministry in our faith communities in an area, in a society that's increasingly changing? And so, for instance, what I'm finding is that Nancy Ammerman's research is dovetailing with research from a variety of other areas, all looking at faith communities today. The Pew Foundation out of Washington, D.C. has said 3 years ago that denominational membership in the United States is rapidly decreasing. Across denominations, denominational membership is decreasing. And in the Catholic world, they use this rate called the retention rates. They have a way of studying the percent of people who are born into or baptized into a particular faith. Will they stay in that faith into their adulthood? Catholics have a 68% retention rate. And what that means is that 68% of those born into the Catholic faith, baptized into the faith, will stay Catholic into their young adult years. So we look at that 68%, and it's actually the third highest retention rate of the denominations in the United States. The two highest are the Jewish faith and the Mormon faith, and then it's Catholic, and then a variety of Protestant denominations follow behind. What it's suggesting is that those faith communities that have a kind of a cultural dimension to what it means to be Catholic or Mormon or Jewish, those faith communities that have that cultural dimension or that cultural identity do a better job of holding on to people in that faith. They have a higher retention rate. But for we as Catholics, 68% retention rate is certainly not good enough. That to have 32% of Catholics walking away from our faith ought to be a concern for everyone who's in pastoral ministry. The Gallup organization follows up the Pew research by saying that the issue here is of engagement. That what the Gallup research is finding is that we as faith communities are failing to engage our people in the life of the faith community. And Gallup makes a big point about saying that engagement is not just involvement. It's not just a case of having people do things, but engagement involves an emotional connection to the community. There's some kind of an investment. There's a deep sense of belonging and identification with the community. Gallup goes on to say that what's happened in the postmodern world, roughly that world since the 1960s, in the postmodern world there's been a shift. In the modern world, the pre-1960s, we actually operated on the assumption that believing led to belonging. That what would happen is we would start with our cognitive beliefs about faith, and then we would find a community that shared those beliefs. But in the postmodern world, the reverse seems to be true. In the postmodern world, belonging now leads to belief. That we first find a faith community that offers us a sense of welcome and hospitality, and literally a sense of engagement, a place where I am engaged in relationships, I am creating these bonds, I am using my gifts on behalf of others. Belonging is leading to belief. So I belong to the community, and the belief shapes the community itself, shapes what I come to believe. This is a really different way of looking at church. An example from our own Catholic world would be, in the modern world, it was the highest compliment to a homilist at Mass when you said to the priest, "I really enjoyed your homily. That homily made me think." It's a cognitive assessment of a homily. In the postmodern world, it sounds more like that worship experience moved me. That worship experience gave me an experience of God. It's the difference between the cognitive and the visceral. It's moving from a way of worshiping that appeals to my head and now looking at worship as something that moves my heart, that moves my affect. It's a way of experiencing God. So people now come to worship not to learn more, but to experience this God. That's very, very different for us. That emphasis on the experience itself in a postmodern world has great implications for people in pastoral ministry. The Pew Foundation goes on to say in their more recent study that of those Catholics who leave the faith, so of those who leave the faith, 78% of those Catholics leave between the ages of 15 and 23. Now, that's a phenomenal statistic, that 78% of those who've left the Catholic Church do so between the age of 15 and 23. Well, one of the questions it raises for us is, where did they go? Where does that 78% go between 15 and 23 years old? And what we're finding is that only half of them, literally 50%, join a Protestant denomination, and 50% become unaffiliated. And the unaffiliated group in our country is the fastest growing religious denomination. It is said that the second largest denomination in the United States is former Catholics, and our numbers depict that. So if they're leaving the church between 15 and 23, where are they going? 50% to Protestant denominations, 50% are becoming unaffiliated. It's worth asking the question, why are they leaving? And contrary to popular belief, people are not leaving over doctrinal issues. They're not leaving because they disagree with church teaching. And in fact, the Pew Foundation found that there are as many people within the faith community who disagree with church teachings as there are outside the faith community. So it's not about doctrine. So what is it? And he said the number one reason people leave is that their spiritual needs are not being met. It's about their spiritual needs. It's about the experience of worship. It's about being engaged. It's not about doctrine. Now, having said that about the larger church, the National Study of Youth and Religion looks specifically at American teenagers. And the study that started in 2002, released in 2005 or 2006, in Soul Searching, found this about teenagers. It found about young people that we as denominations are doing a rather poor job of engaging and educating young people. Those two verbs are critical. The verbs that are used in the study, engage and educate. So it's become increasingly clear to us in youth ministry that if we want to ever educate their heads, it starts by engaging their hearts. It reflects the Pew research and the Gallup research that we need to better engage our young people if we ever hope to pass on the faith. And that's an essential part of Catholicism, because Catholicism is a communal religion. And so to be Catholic is to be communal. And to pass on the faith is to pass on the community. So this challenge of engaging the hearts of our young people, I think is a critical piece for everyone in pastoral ministry today, especially for those of us in youth ministry. Now, the NSYR also goes on to say that the single largest impact in the faith life of adolescents is their parents. Now, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone working with adolescents today, but it reminds us that the single biggest impact, that which has the biggest impact on the kind of faith our young people will have, is the way that their parents experience their faith, the way their parents live out their faith. That suggests to us in youth ministry that our ministry map now has to include a very intentional outreach to parents. And anyone in pastoral ministry today, if you look at the studies from Pew and from Gallup and the NSYR, anyone in pastoral ministry today ought to be looking at how does our faith community specifically reach out to the parents in our community, to the young people in our community, and to the other adult population in our community. So this whole idea of how do we engage is probably the question that needs to frame how we approach ministry in our parishes. Now there's a second part to this. There seems to be a kind of a myth that's been accepted that about millennials, that they are spiritual but not religious. And that language gets used very often in our culture. And yet what the research is finding that yes, indeed, there's a spiritual hunger that youth and young adults have today. So that part's very clear. And the key is, where are those spiritual hungers being met? And what the research has said, and what the myth says, is that those hungers are not being met in church. And what people are doing is they're going outside of church to meet their spiritual hungers. But the recent research is saying, well, what's actually happening is they're going outside church to meet their hungers, but they're not meeting their hungers there either. And that group seems to be the group that's contributing to the large number of unaffiliated people in terms of faith communities. The research says membership matters, attendance matters, engagement in the community matters. And that's a very Catholic understanding of faith, because we're communal. It's at the heart of what it means to be a Catholic, is to be part of the community. At the heart of being Catholic is understanding that faith has both a personal dimension, certainly vertical spirituality, me and God, but it also has a horizontal dimension with the community. So the community has a critical role in fostering, supporting, shaping the faith of our young people. So underlying kind of that approach and that understanding of young people and families, the key then is, how do we do this? How do we go about engaging families? How do we engage young people? How do we engage adults in the community? Because that's what's going to strengthen their faith. That's what's going to sustain their faith, obviously into their young adult and adult years. The research that Ammerman presented said that the reason people come back to the Catholic Church, interesting enough, first is about worship. It's about the kind of worship experiences. Literally, to tie that into what Pew found, they come back if they can find, this is a place where my spiritual needs are being met. So when they have that experience, when they come back and their faith is kind of it's invigorated, it's reinforced, they're part of that community. That's the way that we worship, the way we preach, the music, the sense of welcome and hospitality, all that contributes to their spiritual needs. So Ammerman found that the number one reason people come back is when worship is vibrant. The second thing, interesting enough, they sense a sense of God calling them, that there's a spiritual hunger. They return to the community to have that hunger sustained or fed, which is really interesting, because the people who don't come back, the hunger slowly withers away. So for those who are actively trying to somehow feed that hunger for the transcendent and the holy, they do come back. And what's it like when they come back to our community? So the sense of worship and the sense of welcome, the sense of engagement, critical factors. And Ammerman said the third reason people come back, they're invited, they're asked. They said that the third big reason people come back to the community is that they're attracted by either the pastor or a particular pastoral minister, or somebody in the congregation invites them. They ask them to come back and worship with us. Come back home, literally come back home to be with us. So when you put the pieces together, when you put the research together from people are leaving because they're not engaged, people are leaving because their spiritual needs aren't being met. If we accept the challenge of what's it mean to be a faith community, what's it mean today to be a community that engages people's hearts so that we can educate their heads, what's it mean to be a faith community today where people can come and be supported by the community in their faith journey? What does it mean to come back to a community and say, this is a place where I belong. This is where I have that emotional connection. This is where I'm going to be engaged. And so the key then for people in pastoral ministry today is simply that, to ask ourselves the question, as we try to develop a pastoral map that matches up to this new postmodern territory, the question really becomes, how are we going to engage the faith community? How are we going to engage our young people, their parents, families, the adults? How are we going to engage the faith community today in order in some way to engage their hearts, to educate their heads, to sustain their faith?